I don't know if this is going to sound dramatic, but I sometimes feel like there's just something wrong with people. And, sometimes it feels like, you know, I I just don't understand why people do some of the things that they do, that they think the way that they think. And sometimes you also have to think to yourself, if everyone does one thing and everyone thinks of things one way and you think of them the other way, are you some super genius who can see through the matrix and whatever, or are you just wrong? Quite often, if everyone says one thing and you say another thing, you probably are wrong. I mean, you come out of a test and everyone's like, oh, what did you get for question seven? Four kids next to you all say the same answer and you say a different answer. There's a decent chance that you're wrong. But these things I've thought about quite a bit, and I just can't believe that I'm wrong on these. It really doesn't make any sense. But one thing I've noticed more and more, and I think these things I've noticed when the more I've grown up and the older I've gotten, the more almost absurd certain things have become, or at least they seem more and more absurd as time goes on. Where before I kind of took them as things that are just true, as it's just, of course you should do this thing or you should approach things this way because that's how everyone else does it. And I think as I've gotten older, I've learned to always think very carefully about the things that I do and the things I believe. My math degree in college actually taught me this better than anything else could have taught me. Because in my math degree, I learned logic as like a formal system. I happened to apply it to like prove calculus and in my real analysis class. But what I learned from that is that our logic system and how we, like logic, like how you prove something and how people think, it's a system where you have these things called axioms, which are like your base cases. So your axioms, these are just things you believe are true. And from there, using your axioms and logic, you come to conclusions. Those are called theorems, right? So you come to a conclusion, which then you can use this conclusion with logic, with other axioms or other conclusions to do another conclusion. So it's like this is true because of this, and because this is true because of this, and this is true because of this. And eventually you go back to something that you just believe is true. So I learned this idea that you should, quote unquote, always check your axioms, meaning you should always check the things that you just simply believe to be true. And because those are the things that you're building assumptions on. I think this is why you can see someone who's really smart, by all intent, like by maybe IQ measurement or just sophistication, a really smart like Republican and a really smart Democrat, they go down for a debate and they both sound very logical, but they seem to completely miss each other. I think the big reason for this is because they're working with a different set of base axioms. And I feel like in these debates, you should both agree on the set of axioms and only debate on topics. Either debate the axioms and try to change someone's mind on the axioms, or debate topics where you agree on a set of axioms and work from there. But I've really questioned the things we just simply believe to be true. And I think one of the most prominent cases I've seen is a lot of things in kind of the corporate ladder and career progression, and a lot in that kind of world. I went to a high school, it was a boarding school, and I was able to go essentially for free because the headmaster over 100 something years ago said any of the farm kids in a 20-mile radius will always be allowed to go to my school for free, or is like a $500, $1,000 a year is super reduced. But the average tuition for the school was like $60,000 a year. It was like I had multiple truly billionaire family kids in my class, and probably the median net worth of the families of like the kids in my class was probably like 15 or 20 million. Like it was really a unique and somewhat bizarre but great experience because I was able to see almost that, a lot of these families and people that had, I mean, some of them were great and some of them were some of my best friends, and still are. But I was able to see, these families that had so much money, right, and so much status, and they were still miserable. They were as miserable as the person making 30K a year, but just for different reasons, which I think is a total waste. If you have all this money and you use it as a tool, you can, in theory, build exactly the life you want to build. And one of the most bizarre things that I saw that I just can't understand, there would be these kids that were super smart and had families that had plenty of money, and they would go and going, and I see this right now, they're going into these careers that are miserable. Sure, like big law or banking or consulting or one of these groups, yeah, they technically pay well. You're in the upper like quintile of income earners, but every single person I've talked to is extremely miserable. And sometimes it's, I'm going to work this career, I'm going to work this job so that I can, make all this money. And, I look at these careers, and even someone who's like 40, like even if they're like in private equity or something, they're still miserable and they have no time. They're raising a family or whatever. And I also understand, like, if you're in a really tough financial situation, you need to work multiple jobs to make things ends meet. That's one thing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about purposely choosing a job where you basically sacrifice all of your time in your 20s, your 30s, and a bit of your early 50s to progress quite a bit with your income. And for, some kids who are just very smart but maybe didn't come from, really rich families, I can understand this a bit more, but I still think that there's so many opportunities out there, from starting your own company to joining a startup to joining just any other firm or company or your own company that could in theory have a good pay trajectory, but you also have your life. What are you supposed to do with the money that you make? I've thought about this a lot more recently because, really 2 years ago, I started my company, but a year ago was when it was in super crazy grind startup mode, and that was fine for a bit. But I'm getting to a point where it's like I have multiple employees, we're still growing, but I don't have to be up at 2 a.m. every single night, like tweaking out and getting up at 8 a.m. and every single moment is just, devoted to the business. And I thought about it and I was thinking, that was fun for a while, but almost like what a wasted life that would be if that's all I did. And I think about, well, you want this money, right? Maybe you make $500,000 a year, a unfathomable sum of money by the time you're 50, and you get a little bit of freedom, right? You don't have to work late on weekends. You get to go home early. At this point, your kids have almost grown up. You've missed that magical experience. And it's one thing if you have to work multiple jobs to have your family like survive. I think that's incredibly honorable and a lot of respect to those people. It's another thing where you almost chose this path because of the money and the status. It's really the status here. For what? For who? Why? And you're sacrificing the experiences, and more importantly, the experiences you have with your family and your kids growing up. All of the regrets I hear from people in this position when they're older is basically, why did I do this? And it's the thing that's even more almost not infuriating, but bewildering to me is the kids who come from really well-off backgrounds still deciding to choose this route. Because at this point, the money part is almost removed and it's 100% on the status game. And here's the thing, status is actually important. I think too many people take strictly black or white approaches to a lot of things in life, where most things are not a binary yes, no, 1, 0, 100% or 0%. There are some rare cases where that is true, but in most cases, it's not a binary. So I want to say, like, status is actually important. I mean, in kind of like mating and selection, status, like Dr. David Buss noted, status is one of the most important things. Conscious or subconscious, obviously, if you're dating a partner, so like primarily for their social status, that's probably going to be a very shaky relationship. But subconsciously, that is something that is like factored in, right? Especially for women dating men. Just look at the data and the research on this. There is some evolutionary reason why there's some level of importance to it. However, I think a lot of people now have absolutely kind of gone crazy, and they decide to sacrifice basically their entire life and all the experiences that everyone basically agrees are actually meaningful to basically farm status. But it also gets to a point, I saw this with a lot of these families, where you're playing a losing game because there's always going to be someone with more money than you, unless you're Elon Musk. And even then, you go down on the list, now there's someone else with more money than you. When you progress in these status games, like when you're a banker, Goldman Sachs, you make all this money. The problem is you only really make a lot of money when you go home to like see your friends, or you go to Thanksgiving dinner, or you go to like your hometown bar. But for the majority of your day and the majority of your life, you're surrounded by people making the same, if not more money than you. So you're actually just jumping into a bigger, you're playing a ranked lobby, right? You're playing like against other people where just, it's like a video game where when you get better, you just play people who are better. Like in chess, you just keep on playing, like as your elo goes up, you just keep on playing people of similar elo. So they get better. And unless you find 100% complete satisfaction from playing that game for your entire life, and that's the only thing you're doing, it makes absolutely no fucking sense why you do it. And it's challenging because there's people in my life that I know that are incredibly smart, good people that are like, they think through this and they've almost fallen into this trap. And I'm not aggressive about this with them, but I do kind of ask them the questions of like, why? And they all say, I don't know. And it's like these incredibly smart people are so good at making decisions, right? Within the path that they're on, yet they never question the path itself. And I think it's also something where if you decide to just be a Buddhist monk and go live in the mountains, like that might be right for some people, but there's a lot of monks, but there's a lot of monks, right? But there's not a lot of enlightened people, right? So I don't think the whole point is to give away all possessions and attachment. I don't think that's correct. I mean, you can disagree and that's totally fine. I think attachment is one of the most important. I think that's part of what makes you human. I think that's part of what makes life rich and fulfilled and like having relationships. And here's the thing, I like some things too, like a cool watch, a cool OG Pokemon card. Like, dude, I like that. Like, don't get me wrong. But it's almost like when you make a decision, like for me, I'm okay. I still need to do more things in my 20s, and I'm trying to be more and more active right now. But I'm okay sacrificing a little bit of my time, a little bit more than the average person in my 20s to make an exponential kind of return financially. Because, and only because, I would use that money to then have a lot more freedom and flexibility in my 30s to spend more time with my kids. I always think to myself, if I'm going to sacrifice something now for more money, what I need to justify that financial income gain with something that I would rather have. So I would rather have more time with my kids. So I'm okay giving up a little bit of time now. But I think about it, I'm like, I don't, what the fuck am I supposed to do with my money when I'm 40 or 50? I'll need enough to like keep up my life, but like, yeah, maybe travel a bit, but okay, cool. Traveling's awesome, but like, okay. Would I really sacrifice the time with my kids for that? No. And remember, I'm speaking specifically about choosing, not if you're forced to do it. I think it's very honorable to sacrifice a lot of your life for work to feed your family, as opposed to farm status, right? It's a big difference. Moving on to another thing that I just can't understand, is just so weird to me, is almost like how quick to anger and how blocked off people are. I find myself, and I try to do this actively, but I always try to, I never see the point in almost escalating a conversation, escalating an argument. There's sometimes people in your life will take advantage of you, and I've definitely been on that side as well, where I've been taken advantage of because like I'm like too nice or too understanding. But in a lot of cases, you almost have to think about the game theory behind it. Someone is like upset at you for something, and you might not think it's totally justified, but it's also not that deep. And you can make a couple of choices. You can get super closed off, be super feisty with them, because you think, oh, well, yeah, but you did this, right? It's when I see arguments or hear arguments where someone's like, you did this thing, and the person's response is, yeah, but you did this thing. The problem with that path is you don't get anywhere. If anything, you've just made the relationship worse. And the other person is that you're like, if someone says you did this thing and you reply, well, you did this thing, well, the person you just replied to is also going to be walled off. Like they're not going to be listening to you. But instead, path B, you take accountability, you apologize for it, and then you can also have a separate conversation where say, hey, while we're on kind of this topic, I'd also like to talk about this. You disarm someone's defenses, and then you're both able to move forward. And people just like, it's so rare for me to see someone who's able to do this, and it just makes no sense to me. The majority of like arguments and conflicts and beefs that people have, it's just so unfounded. And I just can't understand how people approach life this way. It makes genuinely no sense to me. I can't comprehend it. And it just seems unfathomably dumb. I just don't get it. In addition, I hate to say surface level conversations because it makes me seem like super pretentious and like, well, I'm so deep and everyone's like a shallow pond, blah, blah, blah. I get it. But there's a lot of like groups of friends and people that are like hanging out together. And I swear the only things that they ever talk about, it's like, oh, beer, women, sports, whatever. And don't get me wrong, like a little bit of that convo with the boys is fun, but it's so bizarre to me that I see people kind of walking around where they're only friendships. They only talk about basically bullshit all day. And I'm not saying you have to like talk about the meaning of life with your buddies or whatever all the time, but it seems like so many people are just like they just not only are they comfortable with it, but it's like they want that level. It's like that's fulfilling to them. And I just can't understand. I just can't understand that. It just makes no sense. I also feel like right now it's especially a lot of people kind of my generation, and I don't want to be a back in my generation or back in my day, like, yeah, okay, it's my generation, or like, dude, I'm different. And these videos definitely make me sound like, dude, I'm different. It's my diary channel. I can say what I want on here. But I also feel like there's a lot of things with like my generation where we're cooked, right? And this is something where I've spoken more extensively on kind of modern dating and kind of the things that are concerning there in other videos. But it's also like, it kind of, I feel as if everyone is very kind of like walled off and individualistic. And I feel that I'm walled off and individualistic, right? And I'm trying to kind of break through on that. But it almost seems like, when I talk to people about their kind of priorities and what matters, a lot of people my age are doing, once again, the binary 0 1, which, side tangent, everyone thinks in black and white. Everyone thinks in 0 to 1, like it's this or it's that, where almost nothing in life is binary. But there's a lot of people that are either like, I'm going to status farm in career in doing this career because everyone told me it makes sense. Why? What you're think about the like the life force that you're spending, what do you want to do? But then there's other people where it's like, I'm not going to do anything corporate, I'm just going to travel the world. I'm like, that's cool, but the problem is by the time you're 30, or quite often you come back, you're like, dang, I want to start a family. And you come back after traveling all over, you don't really have any solid relationships, you don't have like a spouse, you don't have a way to generate income, or you're really behind on that at least. And then you just spend your time playing catch up, and then you're miserable. It's like you're pushing off this period, right? And it's hard to strike a balance. And look, I'm actually very lucky. Well, I worked for it, but I'm also lucky. That's another thing that I just don't understand, is people almost having this black and white view on luck and probability, where, I hear this all the time with like someone got rich doing something, and there's one camp that's like, there was no luck involved. They worked for everything. And then there's another camp that's like, they just got lucky. And that's not how luck works, right? There are some cases where it's genuinely lucky. Someone wins the lottery. I mean, that's just, you drew a good card, right? But what I've found in my life is that there's so much information that's not on the table when I make a decision. And I made a video and I titled it Math Major Proves Why You Should Ask Her Out. And I talked about expected value, so I won't go into that too much. You can watch that video on my channel if you want to learn more about expected value and thinking through that way. But there's so much that you don't know. But if you position yourself in situations again and again and again where you have a chance to get lucky, then it's almost like making your own luck. For me, it's like with my business, I take a lot of sales calls. I take a lot of calls where I hop on the call, I meet someone, there's probably a 9 out of 10 times it won't go anywhere. Maybe on call 1, I know it doesn't go somewhere. Maybe on call 3, they're like, no, I'm not going to do this. But that's okay, because I know 1 out of 10 of those calls is going to convert. They're going to become an active client. It's going to be totally worth my time. Where, some people might be like, oh, well, you're so lucky you have that business. It's like, well, yeah, actually, there was a sequence of events where I got lucky, but you should also see the total sequence of events that I took, where a lot of those I got unlucky by that same description. There's also, when you're playing the luck game, there's a lot of variance. So you might look at the difference between Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. I know both very controversial names. I'm not going to be talking about the controversies. I'm going to be talking about Elon is orders like orders of magnitude more like richer than Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel was a lot more conservative. He sold his Facebook investment when it was like for a lot less than it's worth now. He diversified his money, and people think that Elon Musk is just, oh, he must be orders of magnitude better at business, right? And Elon Musk took an incredible amount of risk in all of his businesses. And when you take that amount of risk, you have to realize that if you play that game again and again and again in life, sometimes you'll roll a hand and you'll get blown out. So 99 out of 100 lives, I don't know if this is true, like Peter Thiel would have more money than Elon Musk. But this kind of goes to when you play those, when you position yourself to get lucky, you position yourself to, the luck might not just be this one thing happens or it doesn't. It might be a range of luck. You start a startup when you're younger, might quite likely it would fail, but maybe it sells for 10 million, maybe it sells for 100 million, maybe it sells for a billion. If you position yourself to get lucky, you might get lucky, but different orders of magnitude of luck. I could go on for a while, and maybe I'll make a part two, but that's at least where I'm starting.